town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
The Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast is our name, and reviewing movies is our game. I'm Nicho.
I'm Chris.
And today we are ending year 4 of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird with a biopic, which we infinitely didn't plan this out at all.
We did not, but this was a good one. I was pleasantly surprised by this movie.
And for those who didn't guess it from that intro, we are doing Dolemite Is My Name.
Available on Netflix.
Yes, I think it's a Netflix exclusive right now.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah. So, for those unfamiliar, Dolemite Is My Name is a biopic about the comedian and rap pioneer Rudy Ray Moore and his creation of his iconic alter ego, Dolemite, and his subsequent silver screen debut during the 1970s Blaxploitation boom.
Which then went on to help create the foundation for rap as we know it today, and I think 12 movies based off this character?
Based off that character, there's I think there's 9 movies total, but only 2 direct ones and a couple spin-offs.
Good enough for me.
So, but Dolemite Is My Name is directed by Craig Brewer. It's written by Scott Alexander and Larry Kartzwiski. It stars Eddie Murphy, Divine Joy Randolph, Keegan Michael Key, and Mike Epps. Brewer, I actually know a bit of his work. I know him from Blacksnake as the director of Black Snake Moan. He also directed the Footloose reboot. Which
yes, he did. That's the one I know.
Well, I had to watch it because one of my brother's friends was super in awe of whoever the female lead was. So
understandable.
All the reason I saw that.
Yeah.
He also directed Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America.
Of course.
As well as a movie called Hustle and Flow, which I'm unfamiliar with.
Yes.
As for Alexander and Karczewski, I'm going to
You're going to pronounce it every different way.
Yeah. Luckily, I don't have to bring it up too much. They've done a few biopics, including Ed Wood, The People versus Larry Flint, Big Eyes, as well as other movies that they worked on, Agent Cody Banks.
Yes.
1408, and the Goosebumps movie.
Yeah, that is correct.
So, relatively well known compared to what I was expecting to who would have written and directed this movie.
Yeah, no, I was very, pleased to see their names on it. I've enjoyed most of their works.
Yeah. And now Murphy doesn't need much of an introduction, but...
Of course not. I mean, the man was everywhere, especially if you had any time being alive in the 90s.
And previously, as we talked about in our Haunted Mansion episode, he was still kind of in that quite a bit of family features. He'd fallen off the radar, but he had been doing Shrek between that and now, as well as various other works since the Haunted Mansion. But this was his real return to a good role. Yes,
this is a very despite this being a comedy, this is a very serious role for him, and this was also a bit of a passion project for him.
Yeah, I think this movie had its starts back when Rudy Ray Moore was still alive in the 90s.
Yeah, I know that this was something that had been on his radar for a long time. There's been a couple interviews talking about how he had set up for the writers to get to meet Rudy before he died, so that they could get some stories out of him, try and get some vibe out of him, but at that time the project didn't go anywhere. So it took a little while for it to come back around, and finally for Netflix to be well, if you produce it, I'll put my stamp on it and I'll put it on my channel.
Yeah, I mean that's how Netflix.
That's how they do.
Or they're just hey, we'll give you money if you give us streaming rights.
Yes.
And it's why all the anime live actions for 5 years have been Netflix.
Yep.
Yeah. As for Randolph, she's a new face to me. Although she has done some voice acting. She's Mama Luna in Puss in Boots, The Last Wish. She's in People of the Earth and The Lost City, as well as she was in Trolls World Tour, which I know you did a review on a while ago.
Yes, I loved it. Yeah, I'm mildly familiar with her work, but she's definitely not an actress that I've regularly followed. But every time I've run into her work, I've enjoyed it.
Okay. As for Key, he is obviously one of the parts of the hit pair, Key and Peele.
Yeah.
But I more knew him from the host of Planet's Funniest Animals.
Yes, I had forgotten about that one until this.
Yes, but he's also in The Predator, Let's Be Cops, Keanu, Tomorrowland, and recently he was the voice of Toad in the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
Good for him.
Yeah. As for Epps, I became familiar with him as LJ in the Resident Evil Apocalypse movie. Malibu's Most Wanted, where he has a bit part and he's uncredited, but I know exactly which one it is.
Yeah.
He's also been played alongside Eddie Murphy. He is the bear in Dr. Dolittle 2.
Which I hate that exists.
Yes.
Because if you have forgotten, folks, that is the constipated bear who's worried about hibernating.
Yes, and I know how fond you are of that.
Freaking hate that version. The dumbest version.
But what he's also known for is Next Friday and the Friday After Next, as well as The Hangover.
Yes, which I definitely recognize his face from The Hangover.
So, like our last few episodes, there's quite a bit of history to go into this set.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm more so going into this to set the scene because it's kind of a genre that's not super explored. At least...
It's definitely got a larger gap in, like, filmography, I think.
And it was a very limited run when Blaxploitation had its boom.
Yes.
But we have seen influence from it since then.
My gosh, yeah, definitely.
So... we are going to briefly go over what the Blaxploitation genre is and where Dolemite, and basically go through it up to the point where like Dolemite was. It's going to be a very abridged history.
Yes. I mean, because despite it being short, there is quite a lot.
There is a lot. And as such, our sources for this episode are the 1994 documentary, The Legend of Dolemite, Blaxploitation Cinema, The Essential Reference Guide by Josiah Howard, RudyRayMoore.com, as well as the Los Angeles Conservancy for some of the historical sites.
And I managed to get my hands on several of the recordings of Rudy's original works.
Yeah, they're
very easy to get a hold of. I highly recommend listening.
They're all on Spotify.
I think I found a full album on YouTube Music.
Nice. Yeah, I listened to the first album, and I'm not a huge comedy album fan, but I gave it a go.
I would say, it's not my normal listening speed, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah. It's got a very nice cadence to it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No.
And it is funny.
It is surprisingly funny.
Yeah. So, to set up who Rudy Ray Moore was as a person, he was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas on March 17th, 1927, and he moved to Cleveland, Ohio as a teenager. Moore was drafted in 1950, where he performed under the nickname the Harlem Hillbilly. We are also at the early years of the Cold War and the start of the Korean War to give some historical context when he joined the military.
Yeah.
And after his time in the military, he still performed under that name in Seattle, but started using his real name in 1959 when he moved to LA. Something he was never able to make headway in due to the times.
Yeah. And also, like, he very much was the sort of comedy artist who, like, was really trying to figure out what sort of act to go with.
Yes.
There's a huge difference in his early works to his later works.
And this is where we're going to leave off with Moore, but he was really diversifying himself. He was trying to be a singer, he was trying to be a comedian.
He did a little bit of everything.
Stage and dance. Like, yeah, he was involved in a lot of stuff, just could never make it mainstream.
He hadn't found his niche yet.
Yeah. And now, since the movie touches on the subject, I thought it would be important to bring a bit of film history to this.
Yes, I think it is actually helpful. Not necessary for watching the movie, but I do think it's, like, missing a little bit more explanation to, like, fill in some gaps for the general audience.
Exactly. So, at this point, I want to shift and give a brief condensed history of the Blaxploitation genre up to where Dolemite started.
Yes.
And it's a genre I didn't realize I had viewed here and there.
Yeah.
I only learned about the term after watching Angel Guts Nami, which was a sexploitation film that I looked up, like, what the hell was I watching? And then I'm like, what's an exploitation film? And then there was a list, and it's like, okay, and we're talking like this was about 7-8 years ago when I found this.
Once you start down the rabbit hole, you realize how many genres there are.
Oh, yeah. And so Howard's defines the Blaxploitation genre as 1970s black cast or black themed films or mainstream Hollywood pictures featuring at least one prominent African American player in a modern minded narrative steeped in or influenced by the concurrent Black Pride movement. Created, developed, and most importantly, heavily promoted to younger inner city black audiences.
Yes.
So with that in mind, how did this genre come into being? Well, it came from a handful of social events in the 70s.
Oh boy. 70s in general, really.
For perspective, we are still a couple years outside of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So desegregation of the United States to a point, obviously.
Yeah.
Along with some social changes where we're experiencing what was called the white flight, which was the migration of the inner city white population to the suburbs.
Yes. And also, this was about the time where, at least from an architecture standpoint, we can start to see a very hard line being drawn as far as, like, the segregation and the money line, which still haunts us to this day.
Yes. And so with this created a market in the inner cities.
Yes.
That Hollywood, being the money-grubbing studios they are,
of course,
catered to.
Yes, but they didn't do so in like hey, there's a population that could use a piece of media specifically for them.
Nope.
It was more of, hey, these people physically can't leave and don't have anything for them. Let's make them pay full price.
Not necessarily that, 100%. But there were a couple things. So the catering of the content also came from the failing of the studio's Hollywood star system.
Yes.
And the proliferation of television. And Hollywood was starting to go bankrupt at this time.
You know, we all knew it was going to happen.
Yeah. Hence their desire to exploit the market.
Yeah.
Part of the term. This is also where defining exploitation films can be a bit difficult because it's always about perspective.
Yes.
Something similar we've seen with the Christploitation films.
Yeah, okay. I see where you're going there.
Yeah. Now, the first couple films to kick off the genre were Cotton Comes to Harlem and its sequel, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
Okay, these names, pretty great.
Oh, yeah.
These names are pretty great.
There are a lot of them where we can't say.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Hollywood seemed to put less fear in, like, in a movie they considered blaxploitation.
Mm-hmm.
They were less worried about language, about what the audience was going to witness, like, what was being shown on screen. They didn't really censor themselves as much as they had even, like, within the same year.
No. And so this is also what part of led to their popularity. It was the creation of a black anti-hero.
Yes.
And I guess the Black Panthers used the previous two movies as like members required to watch, or at least Cotton Comes to Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
This is also about the time Moore is recording his first 3 X-rated comedy records.
Makes sense.
So, but because those first 2 movies were so successful, what became probably the most prolific and well-known one was Shaft, which came out in 1971 and was really the big start of it all, which is an interesting note because Shaft was originally written as a white role, and then after the success of Cotton Comes to Harlem and Sweetback's Badass Song, they reworked it for a black role. So it's obviously clear, you can see from the very get-go,
you can see it,
how you can consider this genre exploitative from a certain viewpoint.
Yes.
And on top of that, the reception to the movies was divided. One side saw them as a symbol of representation and a frustrated youth.
Sure, which, I mean, I can definitely see that there wasn't anything else on screen that even remotely came close to this.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side, some of the community saw it as negative and derogatory images and themes because a lot of it deals with pimps, hoes, and...
I was going to say, not a lot family-friendly media being produced.
No.
In fact, I would argue almost none.
I think I forgot to warn you about the amount of nudity in this movie.
That's okay.
Okay.
It worked out, but, yeah, just in general, like, part of the reason why I can very much understand why someone, especially from this time period, would be upset with these films is, like, these films were, like, advertised as, like, oh, we're finally making stuff for you and for your youth to, like, have someone like you on screen. And you're like, great. Why do they only say very derogatory cuss words all the time? And, like, none of these themes are, like, even remotely family-friendly.
No.
Like, not even close. Like, as a young adult, I would think these movies are great, chuckle, and, like, funny. I would be one of those parents that was like, I know you're a teen, but, like, maybe don't go see this.
Yeah,
I mean... But, like, there's also nothing else even close. Like, that's a hard choice to make. Grow up with nothing, or grow up with a lot of, like, over-the-top.
You're talking to someone who grew up watching over-the-top stuff.
I know. We're not the ones to, like, be a good example of what happens if you actually follow Rule B.
Stereotypical middle America would not find these movies appropriate for youth.
No, and I could understand very much how it could, like, church-going mom would be like, no.
Yeah, to be fair, we also don't have the R rating at this point, so...
No, and they knew that, and they definitely, like, worked around that.
Yeah. As for the Blaxploitation term itself, it was coined by Janice Griffin, who was the head of the NAACP. Also to note, I think this is important to bring it up, is because Griffin was a failed Hollywood press agent who failed to acquire the rights to another Blaxploitation film called Superfly.
Yeah,
or
that
the
makes sense.
Superfly account. And just a movie that so happened to come out the same year that Griffin coined the term.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of ulterior motive there, but
it's also Hollywood. Like, when is there not?
Exactly. But it works.
It does. It does define the genre despite that.
Yeah. But there is also negative reception to that term.
Sure. I mean, it doesn't sound great.
No, not at all.
Like, especially if you don't bother to do any, like, looking into it and looking into, like, the movies that it was representing or being coined as. You know, like, it's not a, like, easy definition word to just pull out.
No. And Gordon Parks, the director of Shaft, didn't like the term. Specifically, he declined to have an interview for a Blaxploitation cinema book.
That is understandable.
Yeah.
That is very understandable.
I also Moore brought up a good point in the documentary, is he thought it was a crude term and brought up is Godfather Italian exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like, it is a very good point, and, like, once, especially now where we are in film history, I think we've gone back and, like, relabeled a whole bunch of these movies into sexploitation, black exploitation. Like, there's a lot of, like, extra ones that, like, when they were being made, they might not necessarily have, like, considered themselves in this genre, but now with this, like, lens of the past, we've gone back and like, oh no, look at all of them, they all match together.
Yeah, I mean...
Whether or not the term, like, the people who created this would have liked.
Yeah, this is around the time we started having Bruceploitation films, specifically after Bruce Lee died.
Yeah, there was a whole wave of those.
It's also important to bring up that there is a big wave of kung fu movies that are hitting theaters too, so... Yeah,
and it's definitely not something that we've even run out of. Like, this is still... something that we see, but now instead of, like, directly labeling it with a term that we know will be inflammatory, we've just kind of gathered them together and put them under, like, branding umbrella terms.
Yeah. And I agree, the more I've read about it, that the term isn't a very good term, but
we also don't have another term to call it as a group yet.
Exactly. So for the purpose of this podcast, and lack of a better term, we'll be using the word Blaxploitation. Until
someone comes up with a better one who has more influence than us.
Yes. But these movies are important, as Moore put it. It's the first movies where African Americans were not only getting their ass whooped.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, I got to see some of these. They are funny.
Oh, yeah.
I totally get why, like, people are upset by the term, because, like, if it wasn't for the term, these would just be, like, comedy action.
Yeah, and I mean, they've worked. These elements have worked their way into more modern cinema.
Yes.
They started being actually directly pulled off from the 70s. I mean,
yeah, and, like, we still see some of them make it into mainstream. I do think that there's still, like, a huge rift as far as, like, who stuff gets advertised to.
Well, look at Tarantino's Jackie Brown.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah, I mean, it's still there. We've just moved away from that term specifically, so...
I think now also we're in a point where we can have stuff be directly marketed and, like, only available if you're on, like, Netflix or Amazon or fucking Roku TV. So, like, there's still this, like, very hard divide there, but now instead of, like, labeling it and being out in the open for everyone to look at, now it's more like, well, I'm subscribed to this service who's going to aim at this.
Yeah.
Does it change the vibe? I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see in 20 years.
Exactly. And so, as I mentioned, this genre was short-lived, but it was also the only African-American motion picture boom, because by 1974, and specifically Chicago from the...
Yeah, Chicago, I mean, despite being not a hub for movies, Chicago does hold a lot of weight for what is popular.
Well, from the book I read, alone Blaxploitation films brought in 41% of the revenue to the 8 white-owned Chicago Loop theaters, just to give a perspective how big the genre became. But by 1975... though, the year that Dolemite came out, this was the peak of the popularity, and there's not much mention the next couple of years, because not only did you have to deal with Hollywood now understanding why this genre was popular and borrowing from it, or stealing from it specifically.
Just straight up stealing, yeah.
They also had to compete with other blockbusters, such as Jaws and Star Wars, which were
being pushed a lot harder.
And bigger in their own rights.
Yes.
So,
they definitely had more marketing budget.
Yes. And so that's our very, very brief history of this genre. There's a lot more to it. I highly recommend going out and actually seeing the original Dolemite movie if you can. Yeah. It's on Amazon right now. So
it's very easy to get a hold of, yeah.
But yeah, so that's our very brief history.
Yeah, and while I think the movie does a great job of exploring this, I do wish there had been a little bit more... If there was some way, I don't know what that way would have been, but like some way to like let the audience have a little bit more of a history background, because it does kind of jump right in.
Yeah, and it's very much central on Rudy Ray Moore, which is fine.
Yeah, and totally understandable. I mean, he was a huge influence. There's a reason he's got a whole movie dedicated to him.
And before we head into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
We got gin and punch today. By punch, you have lemonade, so...
Yes, because that was that's the drink that they gave the audience to loosen up. So if you got gin and...
fruit punch.
Adam, go ahead.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Tastes like Summers on the River. Delicious.
Yeah, and I got the really cheap gin, too. So.
That's why it tastes like Summers on the River.
So, Dolemite Is My Name. It opens up with Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye, as we are introduced immediately to Moore.
Yeah, we don't waste any time.
Who is trying to get the DJ at a music store to play his singles, which...
I love the humor in this movie. This one hits just right.
I do too, just because it has that right amount of awkward, but it's also through the dialogue, and just it shows how out of touch Moore is at this time, where he's trying to stay with the old times. He's a wannabe star who's missed his shot, and now he's working at a record shop where he's trying to peddle his record from or his single from 7 years ago.
Yeah, which is the equivalent of someone be like, I'm a Spotify rapper.
Yeah.
SoundCloud rapper.
They reference his stuff as he's stuck in vaudeville.
Yeah, like it's not modern, it's not new, it's not hip.
Yeah. Specifically, we are at Dolphins of Hollywood, which was a 24-hour record shop started by John Dolphin, who was a pioneer of crossover music, which I didn't know about this until recently.
Yes.
It's a music concept of re-recording music to appeal to another audience.
Yes, which that in itself is another deep dive to go down.
Yes.
Because that changed a lot of stuff, especially in the 70s.
Yes. And the reason I bring this up is because this man was important in introducing white audiences to black music through this method, as well as he worked with like desegregating and
yes, and it was
breaking
also
those
like
boundaries.
And it also unfortunately acted as a two-way street, because we had a lot of like white artists coming in and be like, "Oh, I heard your lyrics. I took them." Yeah.
And for those who are unfamiliar with it as well, for us aging emo peeps out there.
Oh, yes.
Think punk goes insert genre here.
Yes.
Every single one of those albums.
Yes, exactly.
But we have very stylish opening credits too, and I mean, the more mentioned in the documentary that this is where he learned to self-produce and manufacture records, because they did everything. It was,
this is a great learning spot.
Mm-hmm. It's all independent in-house.
And runs all day.
Mm-hmm. But it's also just a great setup for a movie too.
Yeah, and also something that the movie kind of very loosely touches on, but like was a huge part in Moore's actual like learning curve, was these places weren't just like a Walmart, they were also like a hangout spot. So this was a great place for him to like meet people that he's trying to sell his record to, trying to like actually get like figure out what people are actually listening to, what sort of thing, like where the like gaps in the genre are.
Mm-hmm. And so from this scene is very short-lived because we immediately cut from here to a club where he's telling jokes.
And they are okay.
And he's just supposed to be the MC. Like, he's just supposed to be there.
And he's not even, like, the MC. He's, like, pre-MC.
No,
he's like, people are sitting down.
He's supposed to... What he's supposed to be doing is announcing who's coming on.
And he's not doing that.
But the owner's giving him, like, a pity. You had 5 minutes to, like, do your stuff.
Like, people are still getting their drinks and getting settled. I guess you can run, like, 2 jokes.
Yeah. And this is the part where it's brought up. He's like, oh, I can do X, Y, or Z dance. I've got these little bits. And the club owners is like, you're stuck in the 1950s. All that stuff's
it's not a thing anymore.
Dead.
Yeah.
And we cut back to the record shop where he's listening to some comedy records.
Which I love that the world of comedy has progressed but not changed at all.
No.
Because a comedy record is literally just a Netflix special. That is the modern day equivalent of these comedy records. It's just the Netflix stand-up comedy special.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, that makes...
It's exactly what it is, and I love that.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, so part of part of this scene and setting everything up is that it paints more as almost kind of a Puritan-ish guy.
Yeah,
like he's stuck in the old way, like Puritan in the fact that the old ways are the right ways. It's to show him that he's not a man changing with the times at this point, because he comments on the records or the comedy records that they're vulgar. It's just swearing.
Yeah, which is hilarious for what we're about to get to.
Yes. But it's also a nice little way of kind of putting a bug in his ear of the viewer that he's listening and paying attention to, not just...
Yes.
He's absorbing what's happening around him a little bit.
Exactly.
Also showing a changing of the crassness of the times that just doesn't fit more.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this, we also get a bit where he's having to deal with a homeless man named Rico, who...
I love Rico.
...is only there to beg for change for soup.
I love Rico.
Yes.
Rico is also a little bit out of his mind.
Mm-hmm. Also, he has to, and to get him out of the store and to give him his quarter, he has to perform his Dolemite toast, which, for someone who is unaware of what a toast is in the context as defined by Rudy Ray Moore's website.
Okay, that's a good definition.
Toasts are a black tradition of storytelling, often the tallest tale being the best.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be like local gossip. It's meant to be over the top.
Yeah.
It is meant to be the hottest of tea.
Yeah, if you listen to Dolemite's first album...
That's what it is.
That's the start of that. That's the whole thing, and it's great. Yeah.
Oh my god, I love it. My little southern heart loves this.
Yeah, it's just vulgar and just over the top great. And so... From this, we cut to a night diner scene where Moore is spinning the idea of taking the old slave jokes, and he could spruce them up. He's a professional.
Yeah.
They've got good ideas, but no one's packaging them correctly.
I see where he's going.
Which is kind of weird because we've gone from him saying, this is too vulgar.
No, like, it was like a night, like a day that he's like, I have changed my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, he's getting shit on by his friends who take it too far.
Oh, I love his friends. His friends give no chances for him to even, like, redeem himself.
Oh, yeah. It's the same way. The way they give him shit reminds me of, like, when friends give themselves a really dumb nickname.
Yes.
And you're like, no, I'm not gonna fucking call you Cobra.
No. Yeah, no. Now your name is Tater Ass. Like, too bad.
But it's just a continuation of him showing that he's a dreamer and that he misses potential. But something the movie doesn't show is that Moore actually had a handful of comedy albums in 1961 with Below the Belt.
Yeah.
1962 with The Beatnik Scene. In 1964 with A Comedian Is Born.
Which he would try and sell out of his car.
Yeah. So there are things that the movie holds back, which I get in a way to try and portray him a specific way.
I think if the movie had, like, gone very literal with, like, his progression in career, the, like, stark change in what he was creating and what soon Dolemite is going to become would not have been quite drastic enough, even though, like, in the real world, like, what he was doing versus what he ends up doing are night and day. They're hardly the same piece of material. But I think, like, just the concept of it without having to sit through all of his routine, I don't think it would have hit the same.
No, exactly. I mean, and the only reason I bring it up is because the way this movie handles it is so much better than the other biopics that we've covered. Oh my goodness,
no. When we get closer to the end, I will rant and rave about how much better this biopic ends up being.
Oh, yeah. And I bring that up because the next part, he goes to find Rico, where he's given a brief history of the Dunbar Hotel, that it was a symbol of that it was once a symbol of the community, but now it's in decline and decay. It's kind of rejected by the neighborhood. It's where all the winos and the drug fiends hang out.
Those terrible winos.
Yeah, easily buys Rico some booze.
Yeah, does not take very much convincing.
Just recording all the stories from all the homeless people. Different in real life. Moore said he took Rico to his house, but I can see why they changed to establish the Dunbar Hotel instead of like, oh, this shows up in the third act for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, no, like it all flows and it all makes sense. It's all like, all of the changes are done for a true, like, watcher's logic, which I do like.
Yes.
Like, I don't have a whole lot of gripes with the changes that they did to the real history.
No, and because also it's not done in a way that over dramatizes the movie.
No, because like we've talked about the ones that have purposefully made it seem like the person did a lot more than they actually ended up doing. Catcher as a Spy being a great example.
Yes, but to be fair, Catcher was a Spy is very muddled to begin with. So
it is, but also like we completely left out the entire end of his life where he like sat alone in his house.
Which I'm glad they didn't go into that.
I'm not.
But also, I mean, looking at like some of the other biopics, where the previous biopic that I thought was one of the better ones, or probably the best one I had seen, was like Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, sure.
And I understand why they dramatized certain parts of it to make it more entertaining as a film.
I also think they definitely played off of the nostalgia lens pretty hard for Bohemian.
Yeah. In this one, they don't do that.
No. I mean, there definitely is
a little.
I think, but a lot of that comes in with the music and the styling, because costume-wise, this movie looks fan-freaking-tastic. Yes. However, like, there's tweaks being made to specifically heighten outfits that, like, would have stood out if you had a, like, fond memory or, like, are partial to this time period. So not all of it's, like, spot on. Like, not everyone's wearing exactly this, but it's close. It's close enough to be both correct and also, like, stand out. So, like, I think that's where some of the drama come from.
I see. I didn't pay attention to the clothing, but I was more so talking about, like, the acting, because there's a couple parts where, at least in Bohemian Rhapsody, where it's like over the top getting pissed off at people, and it's like, I don't believe that.
I see what you mean, yeah.
But the Dunbar itself is important historically because it was a hotel that was financed and built by African Americans to provide high-end accommodations for a segregated LA in the 1920s. Yes. It did fall into decline in the 60s. Notice the one thing I noticed on the website is that they noted their prominent jazz musicians who stayed there, but the note that Dolemite was eventually shot there was not brought up at all.
Bummer. Yeah, no, like the group of us who are into morbid tourism is not the same group who's into not morbid tourism.
Or just weird history.
Yeah.
But there is happy news. Since the filming of Dolemite, it had been renovated in 2014 and is now an affordable senior housing facility.
Go seniors.
Yeah.
You got a cool place to live.
Yeah, but that's the other thing I like about this movie too, is that it's not overbearing with facts. It's good at setting up what you need to know for the movie, but it's leaving like these little breadcrumb trails for like, if you really want to, you can do a little bit more digging again with all like the little things that they left out for pacing purposes that I get.
I also really appreciate that even the background characters, like Rico, are not spending all of their time in like lines explaining basic history.
No.
Like, they are generally there contributing to the story, as opposed to just like, and then the hotel, you remember the hotel? The one built down the road? And you're like, I could Google the hotel.
Yeah, well, because by the time Moore would have been here, he would have seen this place go into decline.
Oh, yeah, no, he would have been very familiar with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard to miss. It's huge.
The way they put it out, I actually didn't look on a map where these buildings are in relation to each other, but they make it seem like it's just around the corner kind of thing.
Honestly, for this time period and for this area, yeah, like, I mean, it's big compared to, like, our town, because our town is made up of, like, 2 streets.
Yeah, you got 4 buildings on a block.
Exactly. So, like, yeah, like, everything's not quite as dense as, like, this, but, like, it's dense enough, like, everyone would have been very familiar with it, like, everyone would have seen it, everyone would have, like, at least one person that you talk to every day would have driven by it at least once a day.
Yeah. Potentially.
Yeah.
So, but from here we cut to rewriting and refining of the works, which is, I like this montage because it's very quickly developing his character of Dolemite, as well as setting a pace for his work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like the little thing of like, oh, he's got a pimp costume in the closet and an afro, and
we're just gonna run with that.
Just all conveniently there of like, it's a very quick development. It's not like, oh, he gets up on stage, bombs it. Okay, well, he's been doing 20 different... Well,
because he's already been doing that.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good thing because it's not a montage of him trying and failing. We've already been told he's been a failure up to this point.
And I don't need to see him fail more. Like, I've already been told that he's, like, already tried all of the things, and that's why he has this stuff. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Because immediately from this, it's also a very short montage, too.
Which I'm okay with. I don't need to see our hero fail this early in the film that much. Like, I have a great concept of what it's like to struggle. Let's get on with the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Because we cut back to the club where he's trying again, but like he shows up and the club owner's like, the hell are you wearing,
and
man?
I love it because honestly, for the rest of the Dolemite character's career, what the hell are you wearing describes it perfectly.
Yeah, no, exactly, because he is out of place. He was
so shiny compared to everyone else.
Yeah, like, he feels like a movie character and not like...
He looks like the most caricature version that, like, anyone could think of. It's great.
I mean, it's the same type of imagery that carried on to us in the early 2000s when we learned what pimps and hoes were, and we're like, okay, we know what that looks like.
But actually, this man, like, kind of helped define that.
Yeah, weird enough. And he's even told to, like, you know what? No funny business. Stick to your bullshit. I don't care what you do.
Yes.
And I love that he's also just done with everyone else's shit.
Which, honestly, was something that he was missing in his previous stand-ups. Because he's trying so hard to pander to the audience in his previous works. And this is something you can hear in his real stand-ups when you go and listen to them. Is like he, in his early ones, is looking and waiting for the response of the audience so hard. And farther into his career, you could hear where he's like, all right, I'm setting the pace. I will tell you when to laugh at my joke. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, too, there's not like... It's a continuous joke. It's not really like a setup, punchline, It's just...
And this is where...
builds and builds.
Yes, and this is where, like, his styling is so one of a kind.
Well... And on top of that, like, he even is, like, telling the guy behind him of, like, the drummer.
The drummer, where he's like, I don't want any of that hi-hat shit.
Yeah, don't make fun of me today.
So, like, he gets the drummer to move on to a different style of drumming, something a little bit more rhythmic, something a little bit more, like, live poetry jazzy style.
They call the jungle beats in the movie.
Yeah, because part of that's also to do with, like, what like, he has him change drum set entirely. It's no longer, like, hi-hat and snare.
Yeah.
And then, like, as he's going, like, more of the musicians are like, I can jive with this. This is good.
Exactly. Because he starts immediately... A vulgar star is born at this point.
Oh, and it is a beautiful birth.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it basically, this whole set that we get is the first 8 minute... Or it's a condensed version of the first track on his first album.
Yes.
Which I think is called Eat Out More Often. And
I think so.
The track is Dolemite.
Yes.
So it's the tale of Dolemite. So
the character he has created. Which, and also you can also see how, I think this is some of where Eddie Murphy's performance really, like, does enhance this movie quite a lot. Something I don't say regularly.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about this, especially in Haunted Mansion, how he's not one of my favorite actors normally. I think his comedy runs with this styling so well because you can see when he's starting to get in the groove of being Dolemite on stage, how he doesn't like automatically shift from being that awkward stand-up we had at the beginning. He takes a little bit to like warm into it. He takes a little time to read the room and figure out like, oh, I'm supposed to be the one to keep talking. I'm
glad you brought that up, because that shows up multiple times in the movie of like he controls the pace of everything.
And you can actually see like where Eddie Murphy's acting really helps this out, because he like it's subtle, but it's there where you can see him like stumble just a little bit with the pacing, like once more musician, like when the pianist starts to hop in on there, he's not quite sure if he's supposed to keep going, and then but he does. It's not overly done.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Subtle. It's subtle enough as someone who has been on stage before.
And just is working with new material.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like it's also just showing that he knew what he was doing.
He really like. Yeah, he had a lot of failures, but he did learn from those failures.
Exactly.
Like, he definitely knew how to be on stage.
So, from here in the morning, we cut to his aunt's, where this is where I learned that he's from Arkansas in the movie.
Yeah.
He's trying to get money to make a new record, even though there's boxes of records that were unsold.
You know what? Those are now furniture pieces.
Yeah, his aunt also brings up cute little Bill Cosby.
Which, I mean, it does help set the time period, because I feel like, especially for the white portion of the world, like, he didn't really make a name in the white circle, but Cosby did.
Yes, because Cosby was family friendly, which, I mean,
like,
we're at the 70s. Cosby's 22 years old.
And, like, Cosby's family friendly, like, if you go back and listen to it, it's still a little raunchy. It's not as raunchy as his later works.
No.
But it's still more edgy than you think Cosby is going to be.
Yeah.
We haven't reached Pudding Dad yet.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of, like, how growing up watching Eddie Murphy as a kid. Yes. Thinking, okay, he is a funny child actor.
Yeah, because you only associate him with kid movies.
Well.
Which is not correct, but, like...
yes and no for me.
Which one did you see?
Coming to America, minus the scene where we have washed the royal penis is clean.
Yes, okay.
That's the one scene I didn't see as a kid.
Good for you.
And also, Beverly Hills Cop and Trading Places. So I grew up with Eddie Murphy, but not like raunchy comedy Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, no, I had those too, and like that was the thing of like, oh, those are like teen movies. They never were like. To me, Eddie Murphy hadn't ever hit adult comedy. Like, those were always like, oh, that's like, bad boy teen level humor. Like, I was gonna watch it, because, like, fuck that shit, I'll watch what I want. But, like, this is the same, like, this is another reason why I really like Eddie Murphy in this role. Because, like, this helps solidify this, like, jump between, like, what he is trying to do, what Moore is trying to do, and what the rest of the world expects to be, like, coming up next. Like, oh, look how good Cosby's doing. He's already, like, getting signed. He's already having, like, talks of a TV show coming out in the near future. Like, he was already being put on, like, radio. He was getting press outside of just the standard comedy audience.
Yeah.
Whereas Moore and Dolemite weren't.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we see that continue throughout it, because, I mean, we know what Cosby became.
We do,
but
which is for a different movie.
Yeah.
That is a different discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do like that they do bring up that he used to be this cute, innocent person.
And, like, we all were there for it. Yeah. Like, we grew up watching him.
I grew up watching The Cosby Show.
I grew up watching his stand-up. Yeah.
I did not.
We were a strange household.
I think the more we talk about it, a lot of people were strange households.
This is true. And, like, Cosby's stand-up wasn't, I don't think, that strange. I went to a strange small little school with strange small little Christian friends. And, like, most of us knew at least 3 of the punchlines from his stand-up. Okay. Even if, like, you hadn't seen the full set, you at least knew about Pudding Dad.
I didn't know about pudding his pudding bit until, like, the internet memes.
But again, that solidifies it, which is hilarious because honestly, I feel like Dolemite's work and, like, stand-up routine, that whole bit, fits better with internet, like, humor and culture.
Yeah.
Like, it would do really well nowadays.
Yeah, it does. It didn't carry over because I don't think...
It didn't get the promotion.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how, like, there's just another reason why I really like having Eddie Murphy, like, not just, like, star in it, but, like, be a driving force behind it. Because, like, you see Eddie Murphy's name and you're like, oh, I'll watch it.
Yeah.
But if this was a less known actor, I don't know if I would have been, like, as quickly sucked in, even if the acting was just as good.
Yeah, I think it also depends because, I mean, Eddie Murphy really did drop off when he really went into his family roles, minus like Daddy Daycare.
No, yeah, he definitely did, and like I love seeing him in this very serious role. I hope he does more of them. He did a great job in this movie, but like he manages to carry the name only recognition that like even though this movie is packed with big names, the ones that I can like easily pick out and be like, oh, that's one I know would bring in an audience.
Yeah, we forgot to bring up Snoop Dogg was the DJ.
Yeah, bless Snoop Dogg. I love him.
And Chris Rock's in it later, too.
Yeah, but, like, they're not even, like, high up on their credits list. They're, like, pretty far down there. Like, there's a lot of people who are in this movie, but, like, if I was gonna slap a name on it and be like, oh, you should watch this, Eddie Murphy's in it.
Yeah, you could say Daryl from The Office is in it, and everyone knows who you're talking about.
This is true.
Craig Robinson.
Yeah, but also if I say Craig Robinson, it's going to take people a minute more than if I say Eddie Murphy.
I also don't know the name of most of the
like I know their
stuff from
like I know
The Office.
Yeah, like I know faces. I like if I see the face, I'm like, oh, that guy was in this. He was in this. But like just the name Eddie Murphy has the same level of weight, I think, as like
Robin Williams.
Yeah, which I think works really well to like help bring this person and this documentary into like a real world connection.
Yes, exactly. But back to the aunt.
Yes.
He kind of bullies her into giving him $2,000 to make it again.
A little bit, yeah.
But this is where we have a cut to the party at a house with the cut for a comedy album. And this is the recording of Eat Out More Often.
Yeah.
Where his now coworker is now his manager and he's getting his friends all in on it.
Which, best way to do comedy.
Which, this is where we get a little bit of liquid encouragement of gin and lemonade.
I love it.
And it's very much, I like this scene because it reminds me a little bit of some of what I've heard and kind of how we started our podcast too, of fake it and pretend who you want to be.
Yeah, you dress up as who you want to be. So that's why you should wear Batman costume to work.
Yes, totally. But, I mean, we did have a background and a little bit of knowledge going into this stuff.
Yeah, but like, you gotta project. You gotta manifest that shit.
Yeah, and actually know what you're talking about and do your research.
Yeah, that helps too, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried listening to some of our old episodes, and they are a bit rough.
They're special.
They are. They're stepping stones.
Yes.
But... also of note, this is the method he would record all his albums, is he'd invite people over to his house.
And honestly, I really like it, because this is still an appropriate time period to have the, like, quote-unquote live audience background noise. But the way it used to be done was, like, in a studio, and you either had a button that, like, played live, like,
laugh tracks.
Live tracks. Yeah. Or what we kind of see more popular now, especially with like the Netflix specials, is like it's in front of a big audience. And while that's not necessarily bad, a big audience automatically will regulate themselves to do laugh track style. Like no one wants to stand out and clap longer, no one wants to laugh at the wrong spot. So like having these be these little intimate, like with his friends who are ready to roast him, like this works really well, and it's part of the reason why these records still sound so good. Yeah,
well, I mean, there's just a level of natural feel to them.
There's a flow, even without the, like, rhythm and the beat behind them.
Well, and this also gave Moore the title of the King of Party Records.
Yeah, makes sense, because they're a good time.
Yeah.
Despite the cheap gin.
Yes. Some say that makes it better.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I will laugh at comedies more if I drink a little bit, but for the most part, like, I don't really laugh at comedies.
Like, one of my best friend and I's favorite things to do when I go up to visit her, since she lives in a big city, is to go to, like, one of the, like, open mic nights at the, like, one of the comedy clubs. So it's not a big person, it's usually not a big crowd, but drinks are half price. And so, like, we'll get a few drinks, maybe an appetizer, and we'll, like, laugh our pants off.
Just don't heckle them.
We try not to, but there's always a heckler, and that's a great time to watch.
Oh, yeah. And so, now it's time for Moore to take his record to the circuits.
Yes, or try to.
Yeah, which he's trying to promote it, but they say it can't be played on the air, which I did not look up the laws of the time, which I assume very much so this was not allowed. It
was not. But it was also less about rules and more of like, we're trying to have a vibe, and this is over the vibe limit.
Yeah, this doesn't fit the brand we're trying to sell.
We didn't have Tsunami at Night yet, sort of things.
What?
It was like the adult programming at night.
Oh, like Adult Swim.
Yeah, like Adult Swim.
Okay.
So like his stuff was good, but yeah, this wasn't going to necessarily hit radio unless he had a big name to push behind it. And she didn't have just yet. Yeah,
I can see that. But they also do bring up that Deep Throat is a big-ass hit movie, which, for those...
Deep Throat is a great name for a movie. I don't care what it's about.
For those unfamiliar, Deep Throat is a 1972 pornographic movie.
Good. Where that belongs.
A big name by the... by the timeline, it's a little off since, like, Deep Throat came out in 72, which...
close enough. It was close enough.
Yeah, a little bit. But that's for a whole other topic.
Yes.
But to give perspective, I know they threw it in as a big name, but by that time Deep Throat came out, Moore had also recorded The Pussy Belongs to Me and Dolemite for President.
Honestly, the names alone of these albums is just delightful. I love them. These are great. Why can't we not name movies like this anymore?
Well, because we have to be very sneaky or have to do, like, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut.
Yeah, the stick of truth.
Like the Fractured Butthole.
I do like the Fractured Butthole one. That one's good.
Or like the first 7 Ratchet and Clank games were up your arsenal.
Yeah, I forgot about the Ratchet and Clank genre.
Yeah.
Delightful. Yeah, like they let you know what you're getting into right beforehand. But also you might be wrong.
Oh. But, I mean, the dude even tells them to put it in porno theaters then.
Honestly, though, at this time period, not a bad plot, like, not a bad idea.
No.
Not bad advice. Nowadays, it sounds a little weird just because, like, we don't have them anymore, but, like, it wasn't just pornos being shown. Granted, that took up the majority of the screen time, but, like, anything that was, like, low, didn't have a whole lot of stuff going for it, yeah, throw it on there. We'll put it in during like, downtime.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is they're saying it's not nuanced, like, it doesn't have the double entendres of, like, you say it this way, but what you really mean is this.
They couldn't sneak it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a great line of, oh, well, he's not going to do it. We got in some legal semantic argument about cock-sucking.
A great argument.
Yeah. To bring up, it's important because Moore is the first X-rated comedian.
He paved the path for it, though. Because, like, yes, listening back to his work, and even what they show in the movie, his works are raunchy. They are not, like, the X-rated that I would assume today.
No. It's like me when I learned that The Last House on the Left was X-rated.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking compared to what I think of X as now.
Yeah, no, it's like Saw did so much more than this movie.
But it really did.
Yeah.
It really fucking did.
But granted, this is all around the same time. I mean, Last House on the Left came out in 72, so...
Yeah, no, like, we were still very much trying to figure out rating systems as far as, like, being consistent across the board. And also, like, figuring out who ran the rating systems. Because that hadn't quite been set in stone like it is today.
Yeah, we're still in that era where we had a system, but we're figuring out. And movie-wise, we're a bit out of the Hays Code era.
We are. We're out enough that if you have the privilege and you have the money, you can get around it.
Yeah, but that's why I think, like, the 70s is such an interesting era for cinema, is because that's when we get, like, the big explosion of exploitation films. I mean...
And also just, like, stuff was off the wall. Like, there was so much experimentation.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Dolemite is an experiment in and of itself.
It's something. Well, and I mean, that's a great thing, too, because, I mean, it's a lot of DIY independent movements. I mean, because immediately after being rejected, they're going to make it DIY themselves.
Which I love. And what do they think to themselves we should make?
We're going to make our record and we're going to use a devil brand on it to make it look illegal and taboo.
Ooh. Which, honestly, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean...
That's how you sell shit.
Yeah, I mean, for the 70s, a very religious time for our country.
Yeah, no, like, this would have definitely been, like, a way to get people interested, get people talking.
Yeah, and I mean, they're selling their production at the Dolphin, and they're also playing it at parties. It's showing that it's also making the rounds.
And also, like, he got very lucky and, like, set himself up so well by having these people around him. So that way, at parties, he could play this stuff, and, like, it started to get popular just by being played at, like, a couple of parties. Mm-hmm. Because the people he was partying with knew people.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, he's selling this stuff out of his van, and now
he's doing pretty good.
And now he's on the marquee at the California Club. It's a really quick way to showing he's making it.
Yeah. It's finally all paying off.
Yeah, and Moore said that specifically when he started off, it wasn't just selling out of his van. He was selling out of his car in the ghetto and using word of mouth as advertising.
Yeah, like there was one of the writers was talking about when they were talking with Moore to, like, get started on the movie. And he was like, yeah, no, I would just, like, walk around and be like, you want one? Mm-hmm. How about you? Like, just newspaper style.
Yeah. It's
literally going, like, almost door to door, but in a car.
Yeah.
Ice cream cone style.
It is. It's an interesting one. I mean, you still see it with, like, kids popping up of, like,
oh, yeah.
You wanna buy some? Or a magazine subscription from us?
Yeah, or, like, I've definitely known a handful of, like, teens who are like, hey, you should check out my album. It's on SoundCloud. It's on Spotify. I'm like, maybe.
One of the DVD producers that I buy from sent me a mixtape.
Yeah! Hell yeah!
I have not listened to it yet.
You need to!
I probably will.
Because this is like, we have reached a point in history where this is now a lost art.
Yeah.
Like, you can't really do this anymore because, like, there's so many platforms that you're, like, put it on there. Maybe someone will find it.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy enough to do it now, and I mean, we're guilty of that, too.
Oh my god, of course I'm guilty of it. But, like, this man made the impossible seem easy.
Mm-hmm. From here, we cut to that his record is catching the ears of the Bihari brothers.
Big names.
Yeah, which I'm glad I brought up the crossover idea earlier. Because there's a line in this movie, think this can cross over?
Yeah. Yeah, because, like, that was a huge, like, market of whether or not you could be really successful is how many people can listen to this shit.
And movie-wise, this is where we have the startings of the Blaxploitation movement and theme to this movie, or a subplot. But it is Moore's chance to finally get his shot. He's got someone who's going to produce his album and make it look professional.
Which, I mean... This has been his dream for years. Like, this is really interesting to see, like, because the movie makes it seem like this happens really fast. And this portion of his career does go fast. But, like, because we, like, had him struggling at the beginning without making it that long build-up scene, that's what makes this feel like it's going, like, 100 miles an hour.
Yes,
He's been working for this for ages.
Yeah, no, exactly. And he's just... going right into it. And I mean, you have to for a movie. I mean,
for sure.
The movie's, what, an hour and 40-something minutes?
Which, honestly, for me, a perfect pace.
Yeah. No,
like, there doesn't feel like a lot of downtime, which is something that a lot of docupics have a hard time with.
Sorry. Hour 58, it's almost 2 hours long.
Honestly, it feels so well-timed and paced. Like, the dialogue sections, the parts where he's not having this, like, high and crazy energy going on, don't feel laggy. They don't feel like they're dragging the whole movie back.
Exactly. But now it's time for the photo shoot.
Yes. Yes. I love this part.
Which Moore said he wanted to make it as seen as possible, and
he did. This man, without meaning to, was a definition of, like, campiness.
Yeah. Like, it is cheesy, full frontal nudity.
It is off the rails, and I love it.
Just drops his drawers in front of these
it kind of reminds
Italian boys.
It kind of reminds me of that, like, trend of, like, anything can be an album cover if you try hard enough.
Yes, exactly.
And this man took that literally.
And I mean, it's great though. Like, it's iconic.
And no, it's very iconic. It's like the same level of iconic as like the Swimming Baby, where you're like, if you grew up in this sort of genre, like you would know this album cover immediately.
If I remember right, when I was reading, there was an interview
with him when he gets older.
Well, it was like for the 25th anniversary or the 20th anniversary of Nevermind, and he's like,
"Everyone's seen my penis."
He's like, "It's bigger now, but."
He handled it well.
But I mean, it's a great scene just to like show like how far he's going for his art too, because
and also like he's finally like really committing to the bit. Mm-hmm. Like he's not flip flopping. Like he's like, no, if I'm going to do Dolemite, I'm going to do Dolemite.
I am Dolemite, or more accurately, Dolemite is my name.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also they use the scene to set up a lot that's coming down the line of showing him repaying his aunt.
Yeah. Which I love that.
It's a big thing to show like he's good for his money, basically.
I also think it helps really show that he was an over the top person, but he was not Dolemite. Like no. he had created a character and he was able to step in and out of it. Which is something that I don't think a lot of these other, especially modern biopics, do very well. Like the one for Queen. Kind of missed it.
Yeah, but it's also like showing that he's looking out for the people who look after him.
Yeah, definitely.
And now he's on tour in the South, which
an interesting choice of location, but okay.
It's the 70s.
It is the 70s.
Of course, he's going to go to the South.
I mean, he wasn't going to get to go to New York.
Yeah, but he's making his gigs around, and he's making it.
Yeah, no, people are showing up, and not just like a few people, a lot of people are showing up.
Well, and it's also a shock factor thing, too, because not only did Moore say that he wanted his albums to be shocking, but he wanted to be as shocking, not just in words, but in album covers as well.
Yeah, like, so, it was a whole package.
Yeah, exactly.
Pun intended.
Yeah. They're yeah. But it's a fun bit.
It is. And, like, it's clever marketing. Like, this is a way to get people talking.
Yeah, I mean, if you are this absolutely insane person, like, God, I've been watching some of the, listening to, like, some snippets from, Bad Friends with Bobby Lee.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, Bobby Lee is a character, like, or Theo Von.
Yes.
Theo Von would be a good equivalent to that.
Yes. I also like that the movie does a good job of, like, explaining that, like, he didn't just he thought through all of this. Like, all of this was a marketing concept to him.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, we see this still, too, with, like, the East Coast, West Coast rap groups.
I also think that, like, this is, like, in the most flip of the coin sort of situation, this is, like, Larry the Cable Guy. Where, like, a lot of people probably didn't realize that Moore wasn't Dolemite.
Yeah, or like Guy Fieri.
Yeah, where it's like, yeah, they are not far, like, they have a root in that person, in that character, but, like, all of the over-the-topness is a thought and a process that has gone through.
Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon Ramsay's a good example.
Yeah, well, like, you see, actually is a very good example, because if you watch, like, Kitchen Nightmares in the U.S.,
it's very
and
different.
Hell's Kitchen, way different than any other show he's in.
Yeah, no. Like, a completely different person. And, like, yes, there is some, like, root of that is, like, he's basing it off of a reality. It's just not his constant existence. It's
a kind of caricature.
It is. It is.
And so, on his rounds, Rudy Ray Moore sees a woman who beats up her man for cheating during one of his performances.
Good for her.
I like the way that, I like that you brought up that he's reading the room.
He really, and like, he's gotten good at it.
Because at this scene, there's all this stuff happening. There's people dancing. There's women shaking their asses.
Yeah,
and he's paying attention to what's happening above all of that.
Yeah, he's always ready.
And, I mean, it just, like, it's overlooking the spectacle, basically.
Yeah.
Because right after this, we go to the show, or we get to after the show, where he's buying her a drink, and we find out she's quite sassy. She's not having his shit tonight.
Yeah.
And he's more there as, like, a kindred spirit, which, I mean, she has her shit together.
Yeah.
And before we even learn her name, like, she's really looking out for her son. She's just downtrodden.
Yeah.
And this is how we're introduced to Lady Reed.
Yes.
And she's also kindred spirit because she also used to be a performer who didn't make it like Moore.
Yeah.
And it's creating a character, and also he's not only doing his work, but he's letting people in on the secret of like, hey,
this is how you do it.
It's a secret. He's like, hey, look, it's fake. It's a wig.
Yeah, like all of this is an act, and this is how you get in here.
Yeah, you just have to have the right audience, and you can make it.
Yeah, I also like that the way that the movie portrays this is at no point do they portray Moore as like having it all figured out, but not so much in that like, oh, he's constantly will he won't he succeed. It's more of like, hey, I happened upon this thing that works really well. Have you tried it?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. He's like, hey, you can do it too.
Yeah.
And I mean, we kind of see it now with like TikTok and people following what does Henry Zabrowski call it? He calls it hip dancing.
Hip dancing.
So I think he calls it something like that, where it's just like I hate it too, because it's all just like
it's choreography.
It's choreography, but it's all just like bounce up and down.
Well, you've got exactly 2 feet worth of frame to go through.
I know,
and it's like a half foot all the way around. But yeah, no, like there is a formula that he has figured out that works, and like yeah, we still see it today. We see it everywhere. We see it with podcasts. We see it with movies. We see it with YouTube and like Netflix shows. And, like, we're starting to, like, you can visually see, like, where the start of that peak is and when you need to hop on that train.
Yep.
And when that peak is gone.
Yeah, what was it? I was watching one of Peanut Butter Gamer's videos.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that back in the day, he tried to imitate the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Yeah, because Angry Video Game Nerd had found a, like, format that worked.
Yeah.
Like, he'd cracked the code for that, like, for those months.
Exactly. He found the right bit of comedy that reach nerds.
He managed to find just the right people.
Yeah. And so now we cut to the next show where now Reed hits the stage as Queen Bee, as the first lady of Comedy International.
I love it.
Which they have this song together that I wonder if Dewey Cox ripped it off a little bit for their song Let's Duet.
Ooh, I could see it.
Yeah,
I could see it. It's hard to say because, like, especially during this time period, a lot of stuff just ends up sounding kind of similar.
Yeah, innuendo.
But this one specifically, yeah, I could see the at least similarities, the parallels, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and I like this bit too because it's not only showing that, hey, she's making it, but it's also showing that they're really putting together a show. Yes,
and also I appreciate that at no point does the movie like go out of its way to like explain how they work together or like why she didn't just like go off and do her own thing with this advice. I like that it leaves the audience to naturally assume how this path is going to go because it doesn't feel too hand-holdy.
Yeah, and it doesn't really, like, set it up to be, like, this big romance, because...
No, because, like, honestly, that's not really what we're focused on yet.
No.
And we're career-based still.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, I do want to bring up a little bit about Lady Reed, specifically because she really co-worked the shows with Moore, like...
Oh, yeah, no, like, it was a two-man act.
Yeah, it was really small DIY, like, he would do his bit while she manned the door, and then he would man the door while she did her bit.
Yeah, and, like, I like that the movie really makes an effort to, like, show that there was this camaraderie with the people working this sort of comedy and this sort of scene.
Yeah, and in a very short time, because she also did write one of his bits called My Day Has Arrived, and it was based off of Moore's struggles.
Yeah, and, like, it's good.
Yeah, no, they do a really good job of, and that's the other thing is like condensing everything in this movie.
Yeah, because like, granted, all of this does happen fairly quickly as far as like real history timeline, but like they make it paced really nicely.
Oh yeah, because right after this, he wakes up and he gets a call that, hey, you're a hard man to get a hold of, but you're on the charts. Come back and make some more records. Yeah. Which we cut a very quick timeline because we get shown the next group of albums of. That Pussy Belongs to Me. I Can't Believe I Ate the Whole Thing. Yes. And a Christmas album.
I love that it's just labeled a Christmas album.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, because like you're I think it's comedic too because you're expecting something along the lines of some gritty or some nasty named Christmas album
or like at least something that's like Christmas punny, and it's just like, no, it's a Christmas album.
Yeah,
I love it.
And I mean, even the DJ acknowledges success, but still plays his old shit.
Of course he does, because he's a friend and he knows.
Yeah, it's also a way of him showing that he's sharing his wealth with his friends and everything too.
Yeah,
like
and at no point does the movie like make Moore's character feel like he's coming off as like pandery, which is another thing that I see happen a lot with these like biopics of really famous people. Is like even if the real person wasn't trying to be that way, just the way that the set is set up, the way they're starting to like center in on that person can sometimes feel like, oh, I've got it all figured out, let me hand the breadcrumbs to my fellow friends who haven't got... No, this movie does a great job of making him feel like he, like, yeah, he's successful, but like he doesn't really like feel like he's got a weight yet to him. Yeah,
no, not at all. I mean, he even like the next scene we see, he's treating his friends to dinner.
Yeah,
which I mean, this is the part where we really get into the movies. This is the end of his comedy career per se.
In a way, yes.
In a good way, because like it is a good summary of like, hey, he's made it as a comedian.
I also think this is a good way for the movie to gently show without like putting it in our face that like part of the reason why Moore became as influential as he did was he learned from his past mistakes of not keeping up with the times, and he saw that movies were coming up. He saw that like stand-up comedy records aren't going to keep you going forever. You've got to keep changing it up. Yeah. Well, so we'll go to the next scene. Yes.
Because treats his friends to dinner, but he's like, you know what? This is I've had this Christmas tradition. Let's go see a movie.
Yeah.
Something my own family has done when we're together. I think a lot of families do.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely is a tradition.
But the movie his friends are throwing out are like Blackenstein or Shaft in Africa.
Blackenstein. Classic.
Which once I started diving into the genre a few years ago, and like I finally a couple things clicked. Yes. I didn't realize that like Blackula. Yes. Was in Billy and Mandy. I always just thought, okay, it's a character. It's African American Dracula.
Yeah, like you thought they had come up with it.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like, okay, that's a good way of putting pop culture into a show that kids won't even know.
Yeah, the kids will never know.
Dracula don't buy it. Dracula scrape and lick.
He's the best character in that show.
He is great. But ultimately, they follow Dolemite, who says he's heard the front page is good because it's supposed to be funny.
And honestly, if this man says it's funny, it must be funny.
Well, yeah, which I haven't seen the front page.
This is one of the ones that I hadn't seen.
Yeah, I don't... This era of comedy is not one that I generally go for, so...
There's honestly too much for me to keep up with for this, like era of comedy, and movies in general, because people were making them so fast.
That's how it is nowadays.
This is true. This is like Marvel Universe on steroids, though.
When I do our Monday posts, there are like 5 or 6 movies almost every single week that I have to decide on, like, well, which one do I want to write a question on or prompt on?
There's so many. And like the 70s really got under like the like train mentality of like, we're going to come up with a new thing every weekend.
Well, this is also the era where like you could make a good picture for $100,000.
Oh yeah, no, and like cheap. You didn't even need to be professionals. You just had to find someone with a camera.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean,
and it would still show up on the big screen.
Look at like shit like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is why we have
this is very true.
Big boom of like horror films at this era too.
Very, very accurate.
Yeah. Also, I love in this part where they are so awkward in an all-white audience. Yes. And it's a good way of showing that like the major movies and this is why I think this movie is so well written and what it does is that it shows that the major movies of the time were not for them.
Yes. And like not even just not for them as in like didn't pertain to like what they thought was funny, but like the movie that they go see literally has not a single black person in it.
Yeah. It's a really good way of
like solidifying that they needed to like create their own movies that like represented them, represent what they thought was funny.
Yeah, but, I mean, at this point, we already have all the history of the Blaxploitation we went through. Yes. So there are Blaxploitation films, because, I mean, they said they wanted to go see
Shaft in Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah, which, you know, the name alone should clue you in.
Yeah. And immediately after the movie, I think it's great because, like, everyone's like, why are you so quiet? And he's like, you know what? That movie wasn't good. There's no titties, no funny, and no kung fu.
And honestly, I feel that to my core.
Yeah. Again, we're also in the middle of a kung fu boom.
Yes.
So.
And it wasn't even just like a kung fu boom. It was like kung fu managed to make its way into everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was everywhere.
Yeah.
It was in places it had no business being.
Which, I mean, that, to be fair, did start in kind of like the 50s and stuff.
Oh, yeah. So. No, like we had been building up to it, but like we had reached the point
or
of
60s, sorry.
Yeah, we've been building up, but we've now in the 70s reached full peak. Why is someone kung fu fighting?
I mean,
but they are, and it don't matter.
But now it's in everything. Like we don't have the bond of like, oh, he throws a sucker punch, or the Captain Kirk of just the gut jabs or boxing.
And it's not even like fisticuffs boxing.
Yeah, no, everything unless it's like a boxing movie.
Everything
is martial arts now.
Yeah, no, you're completely right.
Yeah,
we've dissolved.
Well, because it's cool and flashy.
It
too.
is cool and flashy.
Yeah, but. This is also showing that Moore's desires are now grander. Not only does he doesn't want to be someone who's known for writing a few raunchy records.
Yep. He's got to get out there.
He wants to be Mr. Nationwide.
I understand. Go get him.
And this is where he gets the idea to make his own movie.
Which is going to have tits, funny, and kung fu in it.
Oh boy, does it. I enjoyed Dolemite.
I did too. It was great.
It was fun. And so from here we go, like, he immediately goes to American International thinking he fits with all the other production. Like, he's going to make it with this production company. He fits with them.
Which, I mean, yeah, on paper I could see what he means.
Mm-hmm. And the guy he's talking to is like, well, we're moving away from that genre, which is a good way of showing the history of, by the 75...
It was a short-lived period.
Yeah, people weren't really making Blaxploitation movies anymore, at least the major studios weren't.
Yes, exactly. The major studios were willing to buy them from other people, but they weren't going to make them themselves.
Yeah, where he says, we make a certain type of black movie.
Which, we have seen that rhetoric replay just slightly differently throughout the years.
Yeah. You know, Fred Williamson and John Brown. Also, you don't fit the action type.
I completely agree with that statement.
Yeah.
However, it is hilarious that he's like, I refuse to change that fact.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they even bring up that they don't know how long they can keep making these movies. So it's showing it's still showing that even though he's trying to hit a trend, he is still behind.
Yeah, he's at no point ahead of the curve guy.
Yeah. Which they even say the next film they're going to make is, and he'll love it, it's called Cornbread, Earl, and Me.
Sounds stupid.
Notably, that movie is the theatrical debut of Lawrence Fishburne.
Very good.
Yeah.
However, the name still sucks.
No, it does. And so from here we cut to Moore shopping with Theodore, his manager.
Mm-hmm. And friend.
Where this is the part where we get a little bit of slowdown, because the movie's been kind of going at a quick pace up until this point. We get a little bit of a slowdown where we learn that he's been beaten down his whole life. He left Arkansas for a better life and not to be a sharecropper. He wants the world to know he exists.
Yeah, admirable goals.
Good sentiment for the time of when this is coming out of.
And also, if you want to be not only in a movie, but writing and directing a movie, this is a good thing to want. Mm-hmm. This aligns with those things.
Yeah, and I like that they bring up, they do this through dialogue instead of flashbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And on top
I hate flashbacks.
Oh, I do too, for the most part.
Especially for biopic. There's no reason for them in a biopic.
Yeah.
It's already all in the past.
Unless it's someone going through a drug detoxification. I get those a little bit where it's more, it's kind of a flashback, but it's more nightmarish twist.
I could see that, but I do not need to be told in reverse what the story is.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good way of just telling what he wants to do and a little bit more of his backstory.
Well, and it also fits with the character and the theme that the movie set up of he manifests what he wants. And this is a great way of showing when he finally sets his mind, is I've decided exactly what I want.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer just me, like, chasing a maybe dream. This is exactly what I want.
Yeah.
That's when he can finally focus in, and, like, that's when it starts to click for him.
Yeah, because immediately he starts roping all his friends in at the next cookout they're having, where he's
I love how he's, like, bartered them in with a cookout, and he's like, I have gathered you here today.
Yeah, he's like, you're good with money? You're going to be our accountant.
He doesn't even give them a choice. He's like, you've been voluntold.
You're making the music.
Yeah, and, like, I love how all of them, too, are like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, because even with his friend group, I like this too because he's looking for outside sources.
Yes.
Because now he's going on to recruit, where he's going to the Inner City Culture Center to talk to Jerry Jones to write it.
Yeah.
Jerry Jones was the writer of the original Dolemite movie, as well as he wrote the sequel, The Human Tornado.
Mm-hmm.
But he also did quite a bit of acting outside of that.
Yeah. I mean, everyone did a little bit of everything during this.
Yeah. And he also brings up that they only have theater because there's a bunch of people who want to be Hollywood actors, but no one's hiring them.
Yep, that's a good point.
I also like that he's pretentious about his art.
I do too, because his art is bullshit and he knows it, and that's why it works.
Yeah, and so I also like that they're bonding over, like, leaving Arkansas to find a better life. Yeah,
they're both like, oh, you've been there too? Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, and that, you know what? It's going to align exactly with what you're doing. And this is where he's a good marketing person, too.
Yeah.
We're going to do a movie with Kung Fu for fun, and it's all Whitey's fault.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we're going to hit your desire to have an inner city narrative.
Exactly.
And just I love their writing process because Moore's just throwing everything in. He wants an exorcism scene. He wants them to fight zombies.
It's such a hot mess that only the character Dolemite could do it.
He wants the Dolemite explosion.
Yes, which is hilarious because at this point he's also, like, really trying to hammer down this idea that Dolemite's not only, like, this over-the-top character, but he's also, like, a sex god.
Yeah. I mean,
he's not wrong. I mean, the man's a famous fake pimp, so, like, why not?
He has an album, That Pussy Belongs to Me.
Yes, that's true.
But I also like what they bring up in this is write what you know.
Yes.
Because that's a good way to start off, too, is, like, just writing and talking about what you know. Hence, like, when we started, we talked about movies we knew, and then we've built this repertoire of...
Yeah, exactly.
110 episodes now of
Very
movies.
True.
And so from here, more recruiting time, but the titty bar.
That, you know what? What better place to recruit than the titty bar?
I mean, hey, you got people who...
People aren't going to be overhearing you. They're too distracted.
Some are. But luck would have it that Derville Martin happens to be there, which is a weird place to try and get someone to join your endeavor when he's got a woman under his arm.
A little bit, but also because of what they're trying to create, this is the perfect place to find him.
Yeah.
Like, where else would you look for a movie meant to have tits and kung fu?
Yeah, true, true. You know, they're already willing to expose themselves for money.
This is true.
But I also like that they bring up, because the movie, especially when it starts getting into the movie portion of this, is bringing up how limited roles were for African Americans in the U.S. at the time.
And it's like, it's a great way of making the current nowadays audience realize, like, how little there really was.
Mm-hmm. Because what they bring up is that the reason they know Martin is because he was the elevator operator in Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah. One of the only black roles in the movie.
Yeah. Also, to be fair, Martin was in a handful of Blaxploitation movies as well.
Sure.
But I like how they get him as they're like, you know what? Do you want a directing role? Do you want a co-star?
And he's like, yes, I do.
He's like, you're not doing anything else, so come join us.
Don't say it like that, but yeah.
Pretty much. Well, he even says, like, do you guys think this was going to work? Like, I have agents. I'm a professional.
And they're like, yeah, let's go.
But I love it because it just shows the tenacity of their DIY.
Yes.
Like,
they know. They don't care.
If we can make it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time to sell to the record label, which they're like, you know, we're not in a movie business. Well, it's not going to be a loan. It's going to be an advance on future royalties. You ain't going to...
You're not going to be sad about this.
Don't pay us back. We're going to own you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good motivation.
And this is also the part where now they have their filming location of the Dunbar Hotel, which was a good setup in the beginning to show that, like, hey,
like, people knew this place.
Yeah, and they even get in there and they're like, we can't shoot here. It's like, well,
yes, we can. Oh, yes, we can.
We're getting this for free if we kick everyone out.
You got a point.
Yeah. And I just love his big dreaming.
I do too.
But also, it's great to show that the feds have been on the asses of the hotel owner of like, hey, you guys aren't...
You gotta do something with this.
Exactly. But now it's renovation time, and now it's also Moore's home because he can't afford anything else.
Yeah, he put a lot of his own money in this.
Yeah, because he in real life, he did put every single dime he made from his records into making this movie, and then some. Which, I also love that they're recruiting film students to help.
You know what? Ain't nobody work as hard as a film student. I love it.
Well, and I also like it, too, because there's this funny DIY versus, like, actual film school technicalities.
Yes.
Where, what's his name? Daryl from The Office. I don't remember his character's name. Ben. Ben's like, what are all these honkies doing here? And the other dude's like, you're just the caterer. They know what they're talking about. Just feed the honkies. Which also there's nice little touches to this movie too that you get more of like watching it because there's parts where in front of the Dunbar Hotel, like they're doing a scene going into the hotel.
Oh yeah, this part
where we have a bit where they're feeding the community outside of the hotel.
I really like that. Like they never throw it really hard in front of your face, but there's always this like background little bit of being like, it wasn't just him and his friends; it was him and everyone around him. Mm-hmm. Like, he was in it for everyone. He was a philanthropist?
Philanthropic.
There we go.
I got the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia full-on rapist stuck in my head.
Yeah.
But also, I love that, like, just shows how jankety everything is because they don't have running water. They have no amenities.
Nothing.
They have to steal the electricity from a pole. And I like that everyone keeps calling him out for not knowing shit.
Yeah, he has no idea what he's doing. He has no kung fu ability whatsoever. And it's great.
Not at all. And, like, they bring up, he's like, well, we need lights. He's like, why do you need lights? It's like, so we can actually film you. And then Martin's like, dude, you realize that our skin absorbs light. They can't shoot you with very little light.
They won't see you.
Exactly. But I also like when they do get the electricity, there's that like little magical moment of the hotel lighting up, and
like it's starting to feel like it's all coming together.
It's a spark that shit's finally working.
Yeah.
And even then, so like we cut from that scene to him still continuing to refine his work. He's rewriting, reworking it. We see that he's building up, that he's using his anger from his stepfather to feed his role.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot he doesn't know, but he is a decent actor.
Yeah.
Which is great, because this is Eddie Murphy acting to do this.
Well, Eddie Murphy acting to be a bad actor, because...
He's doing a great job.
Let's be honest. Dolemite is not a well-acted movie.
No. Which is even better, because, like, Eddie Murphy has been in kung fu movies before.
Oh, wait, what was he in? He was in I Spy, right?
Yeah, and I think a handful of other ones that at least were kung fu adjacent enough where he would be more comfortable than Moore would have been. And this is some top tier Inception acting shit.
Yeah. But I also like that these slow moments are kind of... And that's why I think helps with the pacing is they cover a wide range of topics.
Yeah.
While giving the little credences to hey, there was some struggles. Mm-hmm. But we're over those real quick. But they're used for development as well.
Yeah.
And now it's time for the filming of Dolemite.
Beautiful.
Which... oh man, I love how just no one seems to really get it besides the people. It's like an inside joke where the director's I don't know what's going on in this plot's hella dumb.
But it works.
I mean, there's even a part where he calls out Moore for it, but I like the part that Moore stands up for himself. But also the director's drinking all the time.
Yes.
The kung fu is hella bad.
It's the worst.
The white actor in it, I don't remember if it's from the movie directly or if it's from the documentary, where they brought up that the guy who plays the sheriff, like, his specialty role was being the bad racist whitey.
Yes, that was, like, his description of the role.
Yeah. But, God, I just love how, like, really bad this movie is, where, like, they're doing everything in, like, one take, where he's like, was that as good as Shaft?
He's like, yeah, no, it was not.
Yeah. And, like, can you reshoot that to make it look like he's actually hitting them?
Yes.
It's like, no.
No, they can't. That's okay, though. It's
And
part of the vibes.
Even the big car chase just shows how uncoordinated it is. He's like, well, we got a big splashing coming up. He's like, what? I just pulled this off my off my uncle's lawn. There's not supposed to be a scratch on this at all. And after all that, it's time for, like, the big sex scene. And we get a little bit of, like, the slowdown where we have the exposing that Moore isn't Dolemite.
Yes.
Where he's not confident in that role. But he's going back to Lady Reed to confide and be like, hey, I don't know what to do with this.
Yes, yeah.
And
it's a good use of his, like, friend system that he set up.
Mm-hmm. And also, she's just like, hey, just use the advice you gave me, you know? If you're uncomfortable, make it funny.
Which, that's his specialty in life, really.
And also, titties.
That helps, that covers a lot of hurt, really.
Big old floppy titties.
That will cover a lot of hurt.
There's a lot of them. And if you've seen the Dolemite movie, there's a lot more.
There's a lot of titties.
But I also like that this is where he brings in, like, he gets his exorcist scene.
Yes, he does, like, get his exorcist scene.
Just like the room shaking and the paranormal building breakdown scene.
Yes.
And he gets the laugh he wants from everyone who knows what he's trying to do with this shit.
Yes.
But now we're in a little bit of trouble because the film's out of money and the crew's working for cheap or free.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the crew seem to be, like, good sports about it, at least, but we're out of money. Yeah,
he has to ask for $10K more, which, for those who like to compare inflation rates, it's about $65K today.
Which, for a movie, is not a lot.
Not a lot, but if you're a record company financing a movie.
Yeah, this would be... I mean, the movie itself still, like, never cost that much to make, but from a record company standpoint...
Yeah, I think all in all, it took, like, $100,000 to make.
Yeah, not a ton.
Yeah, and even then, like, I do like that Martin is trying to help him, where he's like, hey, I got a friend who will help finance these kind of movies. His name's John Cossetts. Maybe you should talk to him. And he's like, well, good to know. I think I'm good. Yeah. Like, he is just so dense and doesn't know anything.
He doesn't know who anyone is.
No, not at all.
I love it.
And I also love this part, too, because this is where we get to see his Kung Fu sex worker army.
Yes, which is the best part of the movie.
But it's also just like, it feels like a fun behind the scenes, like, filming style, because we get the camera view and they're just all in it.
They're all here for a good time. They're great.
That ends up, it's a wrap.
They did it. They actually made a movie.
The director is a real asshole. He's off to go make a real movie, Black Caesar, which, by the way...
Black Caesar also sounds like a terrible movie, but I'd watch it.
I know nothing about it. It's not one I've watched yet.
I haven't seen it either, but based off of the name.
Yeah. But apparently, like, that's actually how Martin was the whole time, is like, he didn't give a damn about production. He was constantly saying the movie was going to be shit.
Yeah, and like, I think there was a couple of interviews where they were talking about how Moore remembers it, but isn't, like, mad about it. He's like, no, he was right.
Yeah.
The man was right. I mean, later when it did well, he came back and was like, hey, good job. But, you know, it was still shit. And he's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, and Moore even said, like, the actors gave it their all. Like, the cast and crew, they were in for it.
Yeah, they were having a good time, at least.
Yeah. And from here, we cut to Moore awakening and from a call and being rejected by the final film company. No longer can keep paying for his friend's food. Yeah. I love this breakdown scene just a little bit because it's believable. It seems like one of those things where, like, your friends have been riding the gravy train for so long and haven't contributed a dime, and so you're just kind of at your limit.
And you're like, now you have to, like, be like, I'm sorry, guys, you got to pick up your own tab tonight.
Yeah, I mean, he's just he handles all of this with such a, like,
good spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at no point does he feel, like, overly happy, but, like, at no point either does the movie take this turn of, like, and this crushed the man's spirit.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, man, we're back at square one.
Yeah, because immediately he goes back to doing his stage show where he gets the hi-hat treatment of where it's also a good way to show that even he's realizing his comedy's becoming stale.
Yeah, like, this is, like, he's been off stage for a while.
Mm-hmm. And he's falling back on the support of Lady Reed again of like, hey, I can't do this anymore. I'm kind of at the end of my ropes. I think I'm done.
Yeah.
Which, this is where we cut to his interview with Bobby Bale, played by Chris Rock.
Yes.
Who's trying his best to promote him, but he's like, I don't know if it's going to come out.
He's lost his own faith in himself, unfortunately.
Yeah. But this is where he's like, dude, I'm trying to throw you a bone here, man. Like, get some hype. Like,
you gotta get excited for your own stuff.
Do you realize how many people I talked to on this?
Yeah. And he's like, no, I did not actually realize how many people you talked to about this.
Yeah. Or like, I'm all over the radio, man. Like
I could promote you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is where he gets his connection to the Uptown, and this is where he talks to the theater the theater owner. He's like, well, we can do a midnight screening. It's $500 to show it. He's like,
I mean, it's a bit of money, but it would be shown.
Well, he's like, $500? When can you pay me? He's like, that's not how this works. You pay me to show this.
Yeah.
And you get the sales tickets, which this is where Dolemite premiered in Indianapolis.
Yes.
And it's time to, Moore is back in spirit again, where he's like, you know what? I can do this. Where he's out on the street selling Dolemite, which I like this bit because there's a line earlier on where when he's talking about selling his records.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, do you think you can really make it? Or like, I think it's him promoting the movie. He's like, everyone wants a Dolemite movie. They're like, what? Everyone in your block? And he's like, or in the 5 same blocks. And he's like, it's the same 5 blocks in every city you go to.
He's not wrong either.
Exactly. And he's back to promoting from his car.
Which honestly seems to work really well for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this, time and time again, he gets stuff done from his car.
Yeah. And this is his, he's promoting it as the total entertainment experience.
He is also not wrong.
No. But I also like this part too because it has that spark moment.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of doubting and then he peeks his head out and he sees like people starting to line up.
Yeah.
Which, fun little bit, the footage they're actually showing is from Dolemite and the sequel to Human Tornado.
Nice.
So I like that they're mixing up a couple things here and there.
Yeah, and like I also appreciate that the stuff they do mix up isn't like impacting the story in any way.
No.
Like, it's still as effective. It's still the same story. It's still telling the same, like, timeline and everything.
Yeah, and even the theater owner's like, is this supposed to be a comedy, or what is this movie?
He's like, yes.
Yeah. And from this, because of word of mouth, Dolemite is noticed by Dimension Pictures and Lawrence Woolward.
Woohoo.
And it's time to sell it, which, this is the part where I think the movie, I get the intention of what it's trying to do, but I don't think it executes it as well because the production company is like, well, you have to promote this in a certain professional way to get this done.
But that's not what the movie is.
No, and that's not what Rudy Ray Moore is either. He's not that level of like, at least how the movie portrays him as being not professional at all.
That's true, yeah.
But it has that like little preachy moment where it's calling out the Blaxploitation of the time and other directors and actors getting their stuff taken over and like not getting any of the rights, and they're not going to get screwed over like everyone else. And like, I get what they're going for, but it just doesn't work as well.
I agree. Like, this is probably the weakest script part of the movie. It's not terrible. Like, the movie still functions fine. Like, you can get through it. But everything else has been so clean and clear up until this point.
Yeah. But they sell it. Time for distribution.
Woohoo.
Paid back the record label.
I appreciate that there's an emphasis in the movie of, like, he pays everybody back. Like, he is a stand-up dude.
Yeah. No, exactly. Sorry, and I was wrong earlier. I'm going to correct myself. This movie was rated R. We didn't have a PG-13. That's what it was.
That's it.
Yeah. So, I apologize if you guys made it this far. I was wrong. Got my stuff mixed up. But he finally really has made it. And I mean, he also brings up that no one who looks like him was on the screen. But when he starts reading the reviews, they're not very pleasant.
But also, like, critics.
That's not
when are they
critics.
pleasant?
Exactly. I mean, and the bad reviews were actually helpful. I mean,
honestly, like, I love how that that thought of, like, oh, the critics hated it, but everyone in my neighborhood loved it. That means it's a good movie. Yeah. Like, that thought process is the same as it is today.
No, that's exactly why I decided to give the Attack on Titan live action a go, is because everyone was bitching about how bad it was.
Yes.
And then I watched it, and I'm like, this is bad, but I appreciate what you tried to do.
But I love it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he really did make it. They show up at the theater. Even kids know him.
Which is a thing.
All 3 shows are sold out.
Yeah, that's cool.
I mean, that's what they talk about in the documentary. Like, all the, like, the big rappers of the 80s and 90s were like...
They were heavily influenced by him.
Yeah, they're like, we listened to his albums when we were kids. Like,
yeah,
this is what we grew up with
him. Yeah.
And, I mean, I just love, like, his, like, little rhythm and nodding to his rap style.
Yeah.
And just this ending that he's an inspiration to the community, and the movie ends with him being one of the people, and just ends with, like, the little credits of, like, broke all records, grossed $10 million, which the movie was super successful. The bad criticism did help make it popular.
Yeah, they really did.
And it became a classic that spawned sequels and spin-offs.
Oh, yeah, and also solidified his name in pop culture.
Mm-hmm. We got the clips of the actual movie at the end.
I like that a lot. I think that adds a lot for a biopic.
7 more feature films is
That's
what
it was. Which, especially for the 70s, that's impressive.
Mm-hmm. And they also bring up at the end that 1980s rappers discovered his rhyming style, and is the godfather of rap, and the movie's dedicated to Charlie Murphy.
Yeah. It's honestly one of the best biopics I've seen recently.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's quite a bit to this one. I think that I like how they made it as accurate as they could.
Yes.
And I appreciate, like, when I started looking into it, where they tweak stuff to make it work for the movie, but not be wrong, kind of thing. Where, like, they tweaked a fact here and there, but it didn't change the core of the movie. Yeah.
And, like, they tweaked stuff in such a way that, like, it made the viewing more pleasant without... Not even without just changing the overarching timeline or story, but keeping the character true to who he was. That is something that I think this movie does significantly better than any of the biopics I have seen in recent time, is this reverence and honesty to who Moore truly was. Because a lot of these, like, Eddie Murphy actually got to meet him. He actually, and, like, on a few occasions... the writers got to actually meet him before he died. And, like, not just that, but we have this big record. Like, he wasn't shy about who he was. He did a lot of interviews. His work is readily available. People grew up with him. So there was this proper, full understanding of who he was and wanting to portray him correctly.
Yeah. And, I mean, it just shows a level of respect for who he was as a person, too, because... They bring up in the documentary that he was supportive. He kept working until he died, and I think it was like 2009.
Yeah. 2008.
Somewhere around that time.
Something like that, yeah.
But, like, he was supporting of up-and-coming artists, rappers, comedians.
His own community.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a really well-done biopic just to show the career of someone who... really came from nothing. And I mean, we talk about that thing or we bring that up with Giro Dreams of Sushi too, where it's like this dedication and this.
But that was like a different way of making it to the top. You know, like that was I have found one thing and I'm going to perfect that thing. Whereas Moore felt like I have found a way to make others happy. Yeah. And I'm going to run with that until I can't.
There's definitely more ups and downs.
Yeah.
And I mean, this movie was well received overall.
Yeah.
I mean, and not that I take any stock in awards, but it won numerous awards.
Yes, it did. And it was nominated for even more.
Yeah. And part of the reason this is on our radars is because we heard a lot of people saying that Eddie Murphy was snubbed for at least an Oscar nomination.
Which I agree with. This is easily some of the best acting I've ever seen him do.
Yes. And
I'm not saying that as biased as, like, oh, I don't really care for Eddie Murphy's family-friendly stuff, which is true. Like, that's not my favorite flavor of Eddie Murphy acting. But, like, legitimately, I would get lost in... Like, Eddie Murphy has a very distinct face and cadence and voice. And so it is very easy to pick him out of a movie. That's why he can play Donkey.
Yeah.
But I lost him in this movie several times, despite him being the main character.
He was Rudy Ray Moore.
He was Rudy Ray Moore. I think the other thing that really helped this movie is the writers, Scott and Larry. They have such a history with biopics, but they also have a history and a hatred for what they call anti-biopics, which is movies that they thought were for people who didn't deserve them. So people who, like, maybe they did do something cool, but, like, they themselves weren't, like, a great person, or, like, the movie didn't portray them in a way, like, to show...
Or interesting.
Or even, or, like, they did one cool thing, but not enough for a movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can definitely see that, especially with the only other biopic of theirs I've seen, Ed Wood, where Ed Wood has that very similar style, where it feels like it could have been a real-life...
Yeah.
Filming of a documentary kind of thing.
And I think, like, they're, like, not only the actors, because not only is this movie chock full of big-name actors, but it's chock full of big-name comedians who definitely knew about Moore and, like, have taken some, like, pointers from him.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think not just having the actors be so inspired by and reverent to Moore, but having the writers understand who he was fully and also know what a bad biopic is and want vehemently to destroy them really helps this movie.
Exactly. Well, so going back to the subject of being snubbed.
Yes.
Looking back at this and having watched this movie a couple times and having time to reflect and think, I understand why it was a bit. Because the year it was, and any other year, I think this would have been a runner for it.
Okay.
But the year this movie came out, it was a very odd year. This is the only year I've watched the Oscars.
That is an odd year. I don't think that you're watching the Oscars does anything, though.
No, but no. Here's the reason I'm saying it is because the reason it was an odd year is I watched it because it was an odd year.
Oh, okay.
Because this is the year that Parasite was nominated for Best Picture.
That's right. That was this year.
Joaquin Phoenix won the Oscar for Best Actor for a DC movie.
That's true.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was nominated.
I do think that 2019, the Oscars tried what they thought was their damnedest, which honestly wasn't that much, to prove that they were branching out and that they were aware of the times and what people were actually watching and appreciating. Yes
and no, because part of it too, I think it was to kind of jerk Scorsese's
it was
ego.
100% to do that.
Because, oh my god, The Irishman was such a dog shit movie.
No, and like, again, we've seen that time and time again with most of the award for movies out there, where, like, they will throw in occasionally a movie where you're like, oh my gosh, Parasite's on the list. That's amazing. This movie was great. And then they're like, ha, it was on here because we knew you liked it. Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing with The Irishman too, is like, they're like, well, we can only really have one real biopic. And I mean, like, no, you cannot. You can have so many more. They're not the same. Fuck, look at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That wasn't really like a biopic, but it was like a parody of. It was a Hollywood 100%. Star. I 100% agree with the idea that was a comedy biopic. Yeah, but I can also understand why Eddie Murphy didn't get nominated, despite doing a great job considering everything else that was going on that year. And from listening from the interviews that come along, because he's been very open and talked about this movie a lot before, during, and after he worked on it, and that's something that I have always found really inspiring about actors like Eddie Murphy. Is he's yeah, if I get an award, that's wonderful. I don't do this for them though. I do this for my audience, for people who are going to be interested in seeing this movie. Yeah. I made this because I wanted to see this movie. Yeah, no, exactly. And the other thing too is I think there was a great recognition, and
again, don't follow too much awards, but there's an award in the Golden Razzies.
Yes.
That he won it for this one, but it's like the award you want to win because it's an award for like, hey, you've turned your career around from a bunch of dog shit movies, man.
Yes. Yeah, and so like I will definitely say that after seeing this movie, I am now much more excited to see what Eddie Murphy, and honestly a lot of these actors come up and start acting, because a lot of them I only knew from their like lowbrow comedy gigs.
Yeah.
Like Parks and Rec.
True.
Sort of like that level of like, yeah, that was fun, that was good. That's not really like giving you a whole lot of like, that's not really showing your breadth as an actor.
Well, and I think that's something great that this movie does too is, as I brought up some of the history, it gives you like the inklings, and it gives you like, here's a couple little breadcrumbs of like, hey, this is what's happening at this time, but if you want more, you're going to have to go and explore yourself like I did.
And I think this time period and this person is the perfect choice for this type and styling of biopic, because this information is so readily available. It does not take any work to find out information about them. It takes no work or effort to try and find the original sources. Like, you can still listen to all of this stuff. You can find interviews with Moore and a lot of the people he worked with too. Like, this is all so readily available that, like, because they didn't hold your hand through it, because they didn't lie to you about any of the sources, it feels genuine. It feels like a very easy step into this world. And now I have a long list of movies that I've never heard of before, and I'm going to go watch. They sound garbage, and I want to see them.
Yeah, it's a good way to introduce you to the Blaxploitation genre. Well, I wouldn't say it's a good way, but it's a good start to give you at least a couple movies to watch. I
also think this is a good way to like develop a framework around it without having this like, without having no background on like who was making these, who was watching them, who it was for, what the time period was like. Because if you just go in blind to a lot of these movies, which we've done, and like we're fortunate that like we can go in blind, do some backpedaling, do some looking into it, and then come back to it.
Yes.
Whereas I think most people who watch or end up watching these movies aren't going to have the time or the effort to do that. Like, that takes, like, let's be real, it takes us a lot of time to do this.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is a great, like, stepping stone into this world of 70s, like, off-main Hollywood-style movies. Because they are for a specific audience. They weren't just made to, like, fill in a time frame.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, there's other things to watch, too, that I do recommend. I think Tarantino's Jackie Brown's a very good one.
I do, too.
The lead actress in it did Blaxploitation movies back in the day. I more so know her from her Women in Cages movies that she was in.
Yes, I'm familiar with your collection.
Which those actually, so that collection dives into both, like, it's both sexploitation, but it also dives into Blaxploitation.
And like we've also talked about it with like some of our horror movies. We've talked about like these movies tend to overlap in some form because they were all for not the main audience.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, another one that I do recommend, because I watched this at my brother's bachelor party. We watched Black Dynamite.
Yeah, Black Dynamite's good.
And everyone's like, "What? Wait, this was a real genre?" And I'm like,
"Yeah,
like this movie's a parody movie of that era. Like, it's over the top and great."
And like, yeah, it's a parody, but it's honestly not that far off.
Yeah, no, it's really not. But yeah, it's definitely a movie that showcases a different time in a very positive light, or an optimistic light, I'd say.
And also just an honest light, which I think is a huge part of getting into these off the main beaten path movies, especially if you didn't grow up with like an access to these sorts of cultures. Because like, it's diving into cold water for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so having, like, these little stepping stones, having these familiar faces and names to come back and be like, this is what we grew up with. This is where a lot of our comedy that you like comes from.
Yeah, well, and if I hadn't watched that documentary or watched this movie, I wouldn't have known that this man was heavily responsible for creating modern rap music.
Yeah, like, I knew his name. And, like, I had seen pictures of him. Because, like, honestly, once you see one picture, you're like, oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Like, but, like, I did not truly know who he was and how much he did. And, like, the movie does a great job of explaining and showing who he was and giving you room to explore more.
No, exactly. So, I guess at the end of it, Chris, on our good, bad, weird rating, what do you give this movie?
Oh my gosh, this movie's so good. In fact, it's so good that despite the titties and despite the bad language, I'm gonna make my mother watch it.
Interesting.
Yeah, she needs to see this movie because while she is not a bad language and titties normally sort of person, this is the kind of quality biopic that she loves.
Okay.
And so I think this movie's so good, it can outdo those aspects if those aren't to your normal taste.
Yeah, I agree. I think the movie is very good in its portrayal, and I do want to see more of this pair of writers work, just because...
Definitely. Like, this was really well written.
Yeah, like, I didn't know that they had also done Ed Wood going into this, but, like, the style of it, I should have figured it out.
Yes, once you pinpoint, like, what their style is, because it is subtle, but once you've pinpointed it, it makes a lot of sense on who they pick to write about.
Exactly. So, would you recommend this movie? Not just to your mother,
Not
but
just
to
to my
other
mothers.
people?
I would say for the majority of people, yes, I would recommend this. I understand, though, that there is a group of people who, like, I might recommend in a group setting so that they have an excuse to not feel awkward when the too much tits come out.
Yeah.
And they have an escape to, like, go get more cheese dip or something.
Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, there are parts of this movie that definitely aren't for everyone, but they're accurate and necessary for the portrayal of the reality.
And I think especially for anyone our age who grew up with the 90s rap, with that style of stand-up comedy, which ended up in all of our TV shows, whether or not, like, you thought it did, this is a really great way to, like, understand where a lot of our core humor comes from. Like, it influenced you more than you thought you did, and once you start to see his stand-up routines, you're like, okay, I get where pieces are coming from.
My core humor more came from, like, British.
I know you, special little German boy.
Well, and also The Whitest Kids You Know. That came out at a very particular time in my life.
This is true. This is very true.
But yeah, no, I get that. I personally would recommend it to a lot of people.
Yeah.
The movie Dolemite itself,
I think
few and far between, I'd say.
No, I would disagree. I think if someone gets through this movie and they think this movie was hilarious and they did not mind the cussing, they did not mind the tits, you do need to see Dolemite the original. It is a wild ride.
It's something.
It is something else. And, like, it is crazy and out there, but it is a good time.
Yeah, and on top of that, I do also, if you like that type of movie, I do recommend The Human Tornado.
Yes.
I wasn't exactly a fan of Shaolin Dolemite. I think it was a bit long for what it was trying to do.
I understand that. However, like, again, like, if bad language doesn't bother you, if some, like, awkward floppy tits don't bother you, like, I recommend getting into this sort of stuff. Like, the stand-up comedy is still good.
Yeah.
The movies are off the walls funny, and they are a good time with some popcorn and, like, just letting your mind rot.
Yeah, nope, exactly.
Yeah.
So, that's Dolemite Is My Name.
It's such a good movie.
It is. But I do want to take a moment just to say thank everyone for listening to us. This is the end of year 4 of the podcast.
Honestly, something I didn't realize we'd ever get to.
Yeah,
been pretty great.
It's been a long ride, 110 episodes, and just
absolutely mind-boggling.
I mean, it's all because people keep listening to us. I mean, we still would be doing it if people weren't listening, but it definitely makes it.
It makes it so much
drive.
fun, and honestly, we've gotten to meet some pretty cool people because of this.
Oh
so,
yeah,
thanks.
And it's just awesome hearing people say that they like our history and just doing our dives into it, and
which is great because our family stopped listening to us. So
my mom listens, but
go mom, mine stopped. She couldn't take it.
I mean,
I understand. Yeah. I understand with the amount of buses that hit our parents every episode.
Yeah, but I just want to say thank everyone for listening to us. We have a good year for episode, or we have a good layout for year 5 planned.
Yeah.
It's going to start off a little bit disorganized as it usually is, but I think we have some good blocks for what we've got after that. So. And
for the first time in a long time, I remembered half of the movies I wanted to talk about next season, so
yes.
Get excited.
But yes, thank you all for listening. This has been The Good, the Bad, and the Year, Season 4.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.
Meow, you bitch.
Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird.
We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, The Bad, and The Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, The Bad, and The Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.